Alright, so what I thought we'd talk about today is how you should be structuring your Terraform repositories and all of your modules. This is how I work, this is how I like to do it, this is how most people do it in industry as well. But it's very important when you first set off learning Terraform that you're doing the right thing. A lot of people, the tutorials online on YouTube specifically, they don't show you how to work in modules straight away. And in my opinion, it's a complete waste of time if you aren't working in modules straight away. I can understand learning sort of the fundamentals and the basics, but when you actually come to work in industry, everything's going to be a module. It's almost highly unlikely, close to impossible, you're ever going to find a company using Terraform in industry, not with modules. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. So what you usually have is your repository and a top level folder with all of your modules. So in this dummy module here, I've got a VPC module and a security group module. All of my main configurations for the specific cloud services, you configure them in your child module. So this one here, we've just got a very basic security group that's allowing SSH. So you configure your main file in here, any variables that you have. I like to use a naming suffix, but this is very basic. Like in industry, you'd have like a generator that does this for you based on a pre-context. And you configure any outputs in there as well. And again, with the VPC module, very much similar stuff. Now the variables that you have configured in your child modules, you have to repeat them in the top level of that repository. And the reason for that is because all of your variable valuables are actually going to be configured within your TF-vars file. Now this is obviously set up very basic, but let's say you had a VPC that had 6 subnets. You could configure all of those values for those 6 subnets, the slider ranges, in one variable with a big list. And that's kind of the process where you want to be with Terraform. Once you have all your architecture set up, you don't really change anything apart from your TF-vars file. And the reason for that is because unless you're a company that's constantly changing architecture, realistically, it's going to be a pain in the ass with Terraform. Like, you want to get to a stage where everything's done and you just change your variables. Now with your TF-vars file, you could have several different ways of doing it. Now, this is set up very basic, but one thing you might want to do is you could have network.tfvars, and then that TF-vars file just has the VPC range or any other network services that you're using. And if you have a really large repository with everything in, you kind of separate all of them out into separate different TF-vars files. Otherwise, let's say you have a repository that has 200 services, like 200 plus variables, in one huge file just becomes a pain in the ass to manage. So realistically, you want to have separate TF-vars. So with those separate TF-vars files, you're kind of linking them back to your child modules, and then you could keep your main TF-vars files for all the basic things that don't really ever change and are always going to remain the same. Then the other thing you want to take into consideration is your outputs, because in Terraform, which is really handy, you can take the output of a resource from a child module and the value of that output that it gives you can push into another module to give it the ID. So for example here, what I'm doing is taking my value of my VPC, the ID, and I'm assigning that as a variable to another module. So if we take a look at the module here, I'll show that a bit more in depth. So this is my security group module here, which is pulling in this child module. Now this child module has a variable for the VPC ID. And what I'm doing is I'm using the output from this resource that is created, and then I'm noting down that output as an ID through my output variable, and I'm pushing that in to a security module. So that's kind of like another way of using variables. Instead of you creating them manually yourself, you use the outputs that Terraform gives you once your resources are created in AWS or in Azure or GCP. So hopefully this is kind of starting to kick in a bit more sense for you now. But as you can see here in our main module area, all we're doing is specifying the directory of where that child module is, and we're pulling in our variables which are specified in our TF-vars. And last but not least, the only other thing you need to configure is the provider for your cloud, which is essentially just the API which allows you to communicate with it through your authentication method. Now the other thing that is quite helpful, which you're going to be doing as well, is storing your pipeline. So what I'd usually have is like a builder folder. Within that builder folder, I might have plan.yaml and apply.yaml. And essentially this is just going to be my CI/CD pipeline that I'll create in GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps. And this will be my plan. So what you do is you don't actually have both pipelines run at the same time. So a good way to really think about this is that your plan runs through, and you may have some like Terraform, like open source or third-party tools to run, like Chekhov or TFSec. I've done a video on TFSec if you want to go take a look at that. That scans your repository just to make sure it's all correct. You'll have your validation in here, maybe a Terraform format, a step, and it prints off your Terraform plan. Now, providing your Terraform plan is successful or not, then you decide what you want to do. So let's say it's not successful. You go back in, you edit your code, so you're not kicking off the apply straight away. Now you could have it configured that once your plan is done, it goes and kicks off your apply pipeline. But the way I like to do it is I just make sure the plan actually works. Maybe you're working in your branch, and then once your PR is done and your PR has been approved, and you merge your PR back to your main branch, it then kicks off the apply pipeline. Is another good way of doing it. So I thought that would be like a good thing to go through and show you guys, because not everyone really goes like in depth on how they're running their Terraform code and how repositories look like in industry. A lot of it is someone will just like show you how to create resources and like basic variables, etc. If you have any more Terraform questions or you want to learn more about Terraform, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll drop some more videos as soon as I can.